Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacasa. This week we've got Zach Lassek on the line. And Zach, you were a Navy brat, right? Your
Yes,
parents
sir.
traveled all around the country. You got to live in some amazing places on the beach, but you were a surf kid growing up, etc., having some fun. And you moved off to school, went to CSU. A buddy of yours was like, "Hey, let's go do some fly fishing." You're like, "This is crazy. We're not catching fish. We should be drinking more beer." Blah blah blah. Later on down the line, I'm going to stick with it. I want to get this done. You go out fishing with your grandpa in Montana one day, and sure enough, in the twilight, you hook into a really nice brown. You feel like you finally earned your catch, and that was it. You were off to the races. Your professional career changed. Some projection. You were thinking, I'm going to be a lawyer, or maybe do something business, and you start going, you know what? I think I want to be outdoors. You pick up a job at backcountry.com. Great place. You're in Salt Lake City now. You have a couple buddies who are guides. They start talking to you about doing some things. And next thing you know, you're off to the races. You're now guiding for an outfit, Pale Morning Drift, PMD. I love the name. Right here in Park City, Utah. And you've had a pretty successful career in it, but you had some humble beginnings and it took you a while to kind of pick up the trade. And we're going to talk about that today. What I would say the humble beginnings of a guide on a high pressure river, right? It's very difficult. And then at the end of the show, we're going to jump into a tip that you have regarding taking a few very simple tools out on the river that can really enhance your day, and anybody can do it. So, Zach, welcome to the show. And yeah, let's get rolling, man.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. Stoked to be on it.
Yeah. So tell us real quick the story about you and your grandpa, uh, how you worked for that one fish and how that made the transition for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's funny reminiscing back to that time because it was such a distinct moment in my life for fishing that kind of turned the tables on how I have approached, now what is my job in the summertime. So for me, growing up, I fished with my grandpa a bunch when I was a kid and had a little spin rod and I feel like I crushed it at the time. And then as I got older, I picked up fly fishing in college with a buddy and, didn't really grasp it much until that time I was with my grandpa. It was probably an evening sometime in the summer. I want to say it might have been May or June. So flows were up a little bit. They weren't crazy. But they ended up being, a little murky, a little tough, for someone who had just gotten into the sport, which was me. So definitely a testament. But, my grandpa already out there catching two, three fish in the first, probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I'm out here struggling. And, he keeps saying, hey, the spin rod's right there. Just grab it.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes that temptation to just take the easy route is appealing.
Right.
But for me, I'm such a stubborn kid. I'm the youngest of three brothers. Everything's kind of a competition for me. So I said, no, you know what? I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to get it dialed in. And finally, I think it was, I don't want to say it was the last cast. Those don't really typically exist, or you never stay true to those words. But for me, yeah, it was pretty much when light was getting really tough to see and hooked into my first big brown on the fly rod and, little Cabela's 5 weight rod that my dad ended up getting me that winter or six
Right.
months prior and that was it, pun intended. I was hooked. I couldn't stop thinking about it and, now I'm out here in Park City and guiding on the Middle Provo, so kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting how some of those moments just kind of, like you said, set the hook, right? Of like, oh, I want to feel that again.
Hmm.
That was different. Especially given the scenario that you were kind of talking about of like spin rod's right there. And you're looking at the spin rod, like, I know I could toss that thing in there and yank a few fish out, but I just want to get it this way. I just, for some reason, want to do it this way. And I get the same scenario for myself at times where I'm like, why do I fly fish? It's so much more efficient to throw gear, or bait, and it's like, no, I do it because of these reasons. And it's beyond just the catching of the fish, scenario. So
Yeah,
pretty
it's
cool.
really
It's a good
everything
story.
that goes into it. It's all the minute things, it's all the tiny little variables that are involved in this formula, and it's, when you think about it, I always kind of relate fly fishing to golf because in both things there's just so much going on, and
Mm-hmm.
if you can simplify it, then you're, you have an advantage. But if you kind of take like a macro approach and you start to look at all of the things that go into it, then it's just like, oh my goodness, like I can't think about it that way. I have to like really
Right.
narrow my focus and think about the things I can control and then read the water and the conditions and everything else from there. And hopefully, you can get the two things to kind of line up and have a productive, successful day.
Yeah, it's funny that you say the golf thing because I often use that as a comparison for guys going on their first saltwater trip or their 20th saltwater trip. And I go, man, how many guys do you know that go out to the golf club to go play around a golf and they don't hit balls before they go, practice? But yet you're going to spend $5,000, $10,000 to go down to Costa Rica, Belize, Seychelles, or whatever, and you don't get your rod out 3 or 4 times a week for the month ahead and go practice casting. Like it
Yeah,
just doesn't make sense to me.
totally.
But we all do it. I've done it myself, So yeah, great comparison. Let's talk about your guiding, the transition you made, and especially on a high pressured river. Those of you that aren't familiar with the Provo River, maybe give them a description of what the Provo River is like in this local community and etc.
For sure. Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. So essentially, the Provo River is a tailwater. So for most of your listeners, I'm sure they know the difference between that and a freestone. Tailwater is essentially just controlled by the dam, right? So all the water that comes out of the Jordanelle Reservoir essentially makes the middle Provo. There's an upper, middle, and lower. The upper is a freestone, technically speaking, kind of starting in and around the Uinta area, mountain range. And then, the middle is going to be controlled by the water coming out of the Jordanelle Reservoir, which is just outside of, in between essentially Heber and Park City, Utah. And then the lower is going to be kind of below and outside of Heber on the way down into Provo. That is controlled by the Deer Creek Reservoir. So, yeah, blue ribbon fishery, amazing, very convenient for, a lot of people in Salt Lake and, Park City and
It's funny. As soon as we started going, yours started doing her thing and or his thing, and mine started doing mine. So no worries, man.
they always know. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's kind of it in a nutshell. The beauty of it is it's 20 minutes from Park City and less than an hour away from Salt Lake. People from Provo even come and fish it, and now that Heber and
Mm-hmm.
Midway have grown, it's become a super popular river to fish. And with that convenience, you also get a lot more pressure, right? Because of the ease and
Right.
access to it. Fishing it, it's pretty technical.
And and I would say there's quite an uplift too from tourism as well.
Definitely.
So we, I mean, I live in Park City. We get quite a bit of pressure. It's very normal to show up and parking lots are full. So just to give everybody a good description of, it's a pretty high pressured body of water. It's not a very big stream or a river. They call it a river. It's more like a stream, in
Mhm.
my opinion. Um, but yeah, high pressure. So
Yeah.
you jumped
Every day of the week,
into
it kind of feels like a Saturday, to be honest. It's one of
yes, it
those where
does.
you could go on a Monday, not anytime close to a holiday at, 8 a.m., right? And that's already too late come full swing of summer. So yeah, it's definitely kind of a unique beast in that sense of always, always busy.
So you jumped in guiding. You didn't have prior guiding experience when you went to the Provo, but you were an angler. You were proficient, etc. I think from my perspective, there's, you know, a lot of people out there that think, oh, guiding might be easy, or I want to be a guide, but I'm hesitant because I'm a little worried about, getting skunked with a customer or something like that. So kind of why don't you talk through, how you were feeling and how your approach went and, your success levels.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think you know, when you start out guiding, I think you lose a little bit of sleep before those trips, just thinking like, how's this going to go? How am I going to do? Am I prepared? Do I have the right flies? Do I know what I'm doing? I think, when you kind of dumb it down a little bit, it can be just kind of intense and, causing anxiety for people when they're first starting to get into it because you have this preconceived notion when you go into something that you're paying someone to do that they should know what they're doing, right? That's the idea of hiring a guide, whether it's hunting or fishing or, a mountain bike guide, really any kind of guide in general. You're kind of under the assumption as the customer of, okay, this person's styled, they have a good sense of what they're doing, they kind of know what's up. But when you're starting out as a guide, you're like, how do people do this and like feel comfortable and have this confidence and
Right.
go about this every day and have success and X, Y, and Z. And I think when you take a step back, it's certainly kind of a big pill to swallow. For me, I was pretty lucky. I had a couple good friends that kind of showed me the ropes. One is now a guide on the Green River. His name's Dan McCruden. Guides for Old Mo and used to guide for Trout Bum 2 here in Park City. Super solid dude. He was a great mentor in helping me kind of figure out the ins and the outs of the Provo, along with another buddy who runs the outfitter I do a lot of my trips for. So his name's Isaac Cole, and also a great friend of mine that kind of said, you know, I know you fished this before, but let's go out. Let me show you a couple tips and tricks that I've learned over the years of guiding on this river and just kind of see how you feel with things. So luckily I had a
Hmm.
couple good friends that had fished the area before and kind of had a good idea of, hatches and flows and spots to try and places to even cross. I mean, just the small, minute
Right.
things of like, where do I cross this river to get to that great looking hole? It's something that we take for granted as guides now. Okay, yeah, it's below X amount and it's CFS, let's cross. Where when you start out, you're like, oh my God, like, can I cross that? Am I going to kill somebody crossing this or are they going to
Right.
drown? So um,
Right. Right.
it can all be
That's
so
a great
overwhelming,
point. The crossing. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that's a great point. You think about that, like, you're a pretty proficient wader, right? You understand how to stand in the river and, oh, I could cross that over there. You just look at it and you go, or you look at it and you go, oh, it's going to be a tough one, but I'll just take my time, but when you have someone on your arm or, et cetera, might not be as athletic, you're going, ooh, I got to find the spot. Otherwise, that's going to limit my locations. Let
yeah.
me ask you this. Um, you talked about your buddies kind of taking you out and showing you the ropes. Did you go out with friends or those buddies and do any kind of like mock up scenarios? Like, I'm going to go you out and you're like my customer for the day and we're going to see if we can get you into some fish. Cause I think from my perspective, and I've said this time and time before, I do not guide. I don't want that pressure. And I'm not very good at guiding. I've done it with my kids and some other friends where I don't, I can't always describe what I'm doing to that person so that they can be successful. Right. A lot of it for me is just like kind of innate. I don't know. I'm just doing this, I know the technique. I may know why I'm doing it, but to describe it and get somebody else into that success or know when to make the change, I don't have the practice at it. It's difficult. So maybe could you, did you do those scenarios or have those scenarios?
Looking back, nothing really like explicit, like, role playing in that sense. But, I think for me, it was, I had experience on that river by myself and with these friends and mentors like a multitude of times, right? So I
Hmm.
think if anybody's going to be expected or think that they know what they're doing, I think, you know, taking the initiative to go and get some beta. And even if that means having really slow days or even having days where you get skunked, hopefully things are clicking as far as like, okay, maybe, you know, the flows are up. Maybe I shouldn't be trying to get out into knee deep water and fish this one really good looking run. Maybe I got to say, I'm going to stay on the banks and maybe walk in, you know, foot or ankle deep to cast towards, you know, kind of the edges of things because I know that the flows are up. So it's like, for me, I had a decent amount of time there before I started it as a job. So I think just exposure. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell and Outliers, you know, everybody mentions 10,000 hours and everybody loves that rule. But, you know, to be a guide, I think you definitely have to put in a little bit of time and just getting that lay of the land and, you know, having someone that has experience in that area certainly helps. So, yeah,
Hmm.
quite a few trips, but not a ton of explicit role play, I wouldn't say, but
Yeah, I think
time.
on my side, um, the hardest thing for me to recognize when I'm with someone else is course correction,
Mm,
right? I do that on my own, I think relatively proficiently, right? I go, okay, this isn't working. I need to course correct here. I need to
mm.
change something. But often when I'm with someone else, I'll get stuck on like, no, this is what we need to be doing. You know, I know this will work. And then I don't course correct
Mm.
fast enough. It slows my day. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think having to course correct and be adaptable is just something that you have to get comfortable with as a guide. I think there's, you know, we talked a little bit about it, is just, you know, having a plan A, B, C, and D for even spots that you want to fish. You know, if you're in remote parts of Alaska or Montana or Idaho, you know, you don't really have to worry about a river getting a ton of pressure and you can kind of just go and fish, right? But when you're on, you know, the middle Provo that I think is probably the most pressured river I've ever seen or encountered in my whole life is like you got to just roll with the punches. And if you're fishing a spot and it's slow going and you kind of try everything you can, yeah, making that move to say, let's actually try another spot is actually one of the hardest things to do because not only are you risking not finding something, but you're risking leaving where you have a little bit of practice underneath your belt for that day and already fishing. So, you know,
Yeah.
that could be the game changer, right? You go to another spot that you have a little bit more intel and beta and experience on, and boom, things start clicking. But to the contrary, you can move and then someone's in that other spot, and then someone's in another spot. And by the time you walk back to another spot that you were just at, someone just went in there.
It's
So
gone.
it's such a
Yeah.
toss up and a debate, I think, for the whole guide community of like, when do you throw the towel in on a specific spot and say, let's keep checking it out and see if we can explore and find some new water to fish today versus let's buckle down. It's a Saturday. It's July. We're not going to find a single thing. So let's get this figured out. That's a tough decision to make for sure.
Yeah. It's always hard to, for me on the Provo because there's fish holding there.
Yep.
And you're like, I know there's fish down there. There's probably 50 fish down there, and I know they're down there. What's up? Why are they lockjaw right now?
Totally.
And what are we not doing right, etc. That could be really frustrating when you're with somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. When you feel like you're looking
So,
dumb, then you're like, oh damn, I gotta change
right.
something.
And you have the pressure too of the guy next to you with the 10-year-old girl who's ripping fish out of the hole right up the river, and
Yep.
you're down there throwing everything you can. I mean, that happens,
Oh yeah.
right? Not that 10-year-old girls can't fish, because my 10-year-old used to rip them too. But
Yeah.
sometimes I think that's just like the gods speaking to us. But
Totally.
Talk a little bit about your the difference between your first year and say your third year. I
Mm,
think it was you said where you really started to feel like I'm having some success here. Um,
yeah,
I'm interested to hear that dynamic.
definitely. I think the first year for me, it was, I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to be an expert. Um, I think that's such a subjective word in general, but I think to be a guide, obviously you're entrusted with being an expert in a particular field. So, for me, the first year was tough because, I was still kind of finding my way with the river and the layout. And, I didn't even start tying my own flies until pretty much last summer. I,
Hmm.
did a little bit summer two where I got down one or two different patterns and, kind of came up with some ghetto looking flies. But last summer, I did a better job at having probably three or four that I would tie, fairly consistently. That, sometimes on those tough days, um, having that, home tied booger is the game changer, where
Hmm.
it clicked. So I think year one, a lot of anxiety and worry that I didn't know what I was doing and, that I would suck at you know, guiding people into fish and having a good time. But, as the year went on and as, the last season, the most recent season wrapped up, the thing you have to realize is that um, it's not all about catching fish. And I think for me, that was my inclination is to think that that's what mattered most year one. But after year three, I think for me, I realized, yeah, that's important, but that's not everything, right? So I take pride in being pretty personable and outgoing and being able to connect with other people. And um, I love being able to teach someone something new. A lot of our clients, especially for PMD, are people who have never fished before or have really
Hmm.
remedial intro level fishing experience. So being able to
Hmm.
teach someone something new and having a bigger kind of perspective on things and realizing, it's not all about catching fish. It's about showing someone a good time, giving them a valuable set of fundamentals and things that they can hopefully remember for the rest of their life and just give them good company and also, allow them to really be out there and experience it for themselves. Because
Yeah.
when people
Kind of.
relax and kind of take in that moment, then all of a sudden they start doing better, they start enjoying the day more. I mean, we always joke around, it's always the mom who's never fished before that always crushes it because she doesn't care, one, and two, she doesn't have this idea of how a fishing day should or should not go. So when you're able to kind of
Right.
relax and let go for, the client and the guide, I think things kind of fall into place. So it's a tough balance. It's like how much do you say that you have to care about all these things versus letting them happen and enabling people to experience it on their own. And then when those things can kind of just naturally fall into place, I think that's when, the best guide trip tends to happen.
Hmm. When you look back at things, your description of becoming an expert, what were the things that you did then to help build that expertise or you thought were important compared to now? Hey, I look back at it, I really, maybe I should have focused on this or that instead.
Hmm. I think that's a great question. I think something that would set someone apart from getting that level of expertise, the given right as time, repetition, going out, really just immersing yourself in that experience. Um, I alluded to it a little bit, but I've got friends that do a lot of tying on their own, and that seems to be kind of a game changer, right? Is if you're able to come up with a pattern that's similar to a pattern that you can get in the store, but you're able to tie it and you're able to come up with just a unique flashiness, whether it's some UV or a different color fuzz or, a different style of hook that's a little bit more low profile. I think being able to tie your own flies now that I'm going into, year 4 and summer 4 on guiding is like something that I'm going to try to focus on because I know the importance of being able to distinguish. I mean, these trout are probably seeing, I can't even imagine how many flies in their lifetime, especially the big, really smart ones, right? That I've seen the gamut of flies throughout their years. And just last summer,
Mm-hmm.
someone was able to catch a 35-inch brown trout on the middle, which is just absolute insanity that there's even
Beast.
a fish that big on that river. Um, but yeah, home tying and, just understanding flows, um, I think is another entirely, especially for this year coming up, is going to be probably the most important things. And just thinking like a fish. Um,
Yeah.
that was something my grandpa
And
was.
flows.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say the flows on your side. Is it where the flows are pushing the fish and putting them? Is it where to go, where to cross, client side, or is it a combination of both that you think flows are so important to the paradigm of being a guide?
Yeah, I think it's important for a few reasons. I think one, when I look back on previous seasons, we had fluctuations, but it was never huge fluctuations, right? So it was like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, early season, you're looking at about 200 CFS, cubic feet per second for, I'm sure everybody knows, right? I'm not the expert on that, but so many times people are like, what? What's CFS? Um, and it kind of just hovered around there, mid-season, maybe 300, getting up to 350, something like that. But now we're kind of going into, from my experience, quote unquote, unprecedented season coming up of a big runoff. So it's going to be interesting to see the bump of water. They've already done it preemptively to get ready for the amount of water that's going to melt off. I don't even think we're close to seeing peak runoff, but sometime in May or
Mm-hmm.
even early June is probably when that's going to happen. And, you know, they're just getting ready now. So they're already pushing more water out and, fish have to adjust because, when it's colder water and colder weather, their metabolism is different in the sense that it just operates differently when it's a warm summer day. They're a little
Mm-hmm.
bit less active, a little bit less prone to kind of go out, expend a bunch of energy on something, and then come back to their spot. So I think it's going to be interesting to kind of know where some of these fish have migrated to in their specific hole, closer to the banks, closer in pools. Maybe they're sticking together a little bit more than they were before because, they're able to provide cover from the flows for one another, maybe some kind of like penguin effect. Maybe I'm just speaking out of my
Mm-hmm.
butt here on the fly. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And, I even took my dad fishing last weekend and I said, hey, let's cross over here. And he said, do you want me to come in? And I said, no, I'm going to go in and I'm going to see how it feels. And I got about halfway and I just said, nope, I wish we could fish that spot. Nobody's in there. And this is one of my favorite places to fish. But unfortunately, let's bag it. Let's go somewhere else where we don't have to cross because it
Yeah.
wasn't safe at the time to even bring him. And he's, late 50s, pretty athletic. But I was like, even
Yeah.
me, I'm like, I don't know if I can actually make this. So let's bag it. Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, those high flows they could be unprecedented. We've had more snow than we've ever
right.
had, but reservoirs are low. So you
Yeah.
don't know what they're going to run, what they're not going to run. And then at the same standpoint, if they do run big flows, like you said, not only does it push the fish around and all those scenarios, but it could change the architecture of the river. Those holes that were there or those trees that were there, that those nice
Yep.
eddies, they could be gone. And new things could be in place. So yeah, really interesting perspective for sure. I think we see that on bigger rivers quite
Yeah.
often, but on rivers like ours where their tailwaters are relatively controlled from, A to Z in the season of flows, you don't see that
Yeah.
change. So
Yeah. No, it's,
that's a great
yeah,
point.
right back at you. I agree.
Here, 1 second, I'm going to silence this
Okay.
guy.
You're good. Now.
Okay.
All right. I did the same. I had to get my dog.
Yeah, it happens. Let's see here. 31. Okay, so now you're looking at your third year, right? I think you said is where you started to feel like, okay, I'm I'm feeling comfortable in
Yeah,
comparison, right? I'm assuming it's only going to get better, but it was year three, as I recall, that you were like, hey, look, this was the difference, and speak to the change that occurred there for you, and your not only your feelings, confidence, but skill set, etc.
for sure. I think the one of the biggest factors is having kind of like a mental picture of where you can fish people. So when I say that, it's like, in the first year or two or something like that, I think mainly the first year, a lot of my trips were I was filling in as the second guide for group of four or group of six, right? So I always kind of had somebody a little bit more
Hmm.
senior to say, hey, let's try this spot. Let's go here. You know, this looks open. Why don't you take this and fish these guys? And I'll walk up and I'll see what else is open. I think that, kind of being under the wing of somebody else is kind of natural and tends to happen a lot, I think, for, newer guides. And then year three rolls on and, you're kind of expected to have a better idea of where you can fit people and, a little bit more trips, on your own accord without being a part of a larger group. So I think having that mental picture of like, okay, I have a group of two, these are some of the spots near this area where we're going to meet, where we can try and then hopefully have luck. And then, if it's one person, you're kind of like, I don't even care what time of day it is. I'm set. We can fish pocket water all day long and, bounce around as much as this client wants to. But yeah, having like a mental picture of like your spots and like areas where you can navigate people and also going
Yeah,
towards areas where you can have a bunch of backup plans, especially on this river, is important. So, there's certain areas where we'll meet clients and then we'll walk off from there, right? So all of our fishing is wade fishing. I don't think I've said it or we said it, but all wade fishing on the Middle Provo. There's no drift boat fishing on it. So, if one spot's taken, the beauty is you can kind of just walk and peek around and see what else is available. So, yeah, having that mental picture in year three was certainly advantageous. I think also just realizing that the job that you're doing is not saving someone's life at the end of the day. I think with any job or industry, people always put so much pressure on themselves to perform and do well and, crush it. But at the end of the day, like we're taking people outside to go do something that's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, where people have always been doing it.
right.
So, we get to take people
Yeah,
out and get more connected into nature and do something that's, pretty primal. And something just kind of
yeah.
sparks inside you when, you feel that fish on the other side of the line. It's kind of, yeah, just ancestral.
Icing on the
Yeah,
cake,
exactly.
really,
You're like, oh, okay,
right?
this is what we should be doing. This is great.
Sweet. We got into
Yeah.
some fish, and I liked how you talked about that earlier too. Of it's more than the fishing, and sometimes it's just standing next to your client and okay, make this cast, make this cast. They don't hook up, but you just stop them. All right, before you need to take this next cast, you just tap them on the back. Hey, just take a
Hmm.
second, look around.
Totally.
don't forget, man, what a beautiful day it is. Did you see that sand crane
Hmm.
over there? Did you do this? Blah, blah, blah. Oh my God, isn't this spectacular? Or describing what it could be like at times. Like, hey, Jim, we're not having a lot of success right now, but I want you to imagine this. There's days that we come out here, there are so many fish in this water that it looks like it's boiling. Can you imagine that? Like, I'm hoping later that we might be able to get into that. Might not occur, but just think about that. It's so beautiful out here. All right. Okay. On this next cast, let's do this. But like you said, it's being able to talk to them and create a relationship and, some common ground, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I think my approach is not, I don't want to say it's not normal or it's unconventional, but like for me, my approach has never been so focused on like the number and like catching as many fish as possible. Like, yes, like that's huge. And that is an absolute, I don't want to say majority, but if you broke down a formula, that would account for a healthy chunk of the percentage of a quote unquote successful day fishing. But I think my approach has always been like, if I can get all these other chips in order, then that will fall into place. And if it doesn't fall into place,
Yeah.
that sucks. But I've done everything that I can. So it's like mad about the weather, right? Like there's certain things you can
Yeah.
control and there's certain things you can't control. So if I do everything in my willpower
Mm-hmm.
to set up someone for success and it's not successful, that sucks. But I have over, year one versus year three is that has kind of been more of an epiphany in the more recent seasons is
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do everything in my willpower to have a successful day. But if it doesn't happen, it's a bummer. But, you know, we,
And it still doesn't mean it's not a successful day,
right.
right? We just may not have been successful at getting in the fish, but we had a successful day. You had a great time. You learn a lot. You picked up some tips and tricks. You got to experience a fun relationship in a day, et cetera, et
100%.
cetera.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's all relative,
Mhm.
right? And it's all subjective on someone's opinion of success. If someone's coming out with us that's fished a million days in every single river throughout the world, it might be a little bit tougher because they might just have an idea of what a great day fishing looks like versus someone who doesn't have a ton of experience or has experience, but maybe not experience on a pressured river or technical river. And, the gamut of customers and clients that we see is, like I said, like probably more introductory and basic experience fishing. And then a smaller percentage
Mm-hmm.
would be people who have fished avidly. So I think it's just different for everybody. But yeah, like you said,
Yeah.
if the fishing portion of that formula doesn't go great, hopefully I can tell some good jokes and make myself look like a dumbass and entertain someone else, in a different way. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. Let's cover one more bit on this, and then we're going to get into
cool.
that tip. I do have a question for you. When you start to get into that scenario of, okay, we're not picking up fish, give me an idea of your progression on alterations to what's happening at the time or what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, the progression, I want to break it down into kind of nymphing or fishing for dries, right? Is like, but I also want to try to find kind of a similarity in this answer. So I think for a day that would be tough, right, is that, just making sure your setups are looking good, right? So if you're fishing a dry, you don't want to have on, 4 or 5x tippet. 6x sometimes is too much for this river too. So, knowing that your presentation is everything, right? Fly selection is super important, but the way that it looks going past the fish, I think, and I'm sure other people feel this way, is arguably more important. So as long as it's kind of in that realm of the hatch, right? You don't want to be fishing, one fly when something else is happening. You don't want to go that route, but making sure that presentation is looking good. So, if you're fishing a dry,
Mhm. Clean
exactly, a
leader,
clean leader,
things
a
like
little bit
that, right?
longer leader, even as long as it's not super, super windy and you're battling headwinds, having that longer leader, finer tippet, 6.5X has been a game changer for me the last couple of years. I'm not sure if listeners are aware, but a lot of companies now make half sizes. 6.5X is kind of the new norm, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it for this river. But 6.5X tippet has been an absolute game changer. So, making sure leader's good, making sure tippet's good. If people have the ability to buy some of there's like high floating materials out there, or gunk or goo that, Orvis, and it's escaping me right now, but they're based out of England, and they're one of the more popular ones for like line applicant, just to help keeping that thing up out of the water. If it's going over an eddy, you don't want that current pulling at it and messing up your drift. And then to the contrary, for fishing a nymph, making sure if you can get away with, higher flows, right? You're probably fishing a less fine tippet off of a tag for a bounce rig, for example. So, the bounce rig
Hmm.
for the Provo has become kind of the standard, again, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it. But for listeners that aren't super, I guess, aware of what a bounce rig looks like, my easiest and short answer is Google it or YouTube it. But if not, right, you're running a main line, which is typically 5 or 6, probably 5X for most of our season here. The full wingspan, again, depending on flows, but get a full wingspan of that, and then essentially connect two other pieces of that same tippet below that, so that you have with a blood or surgeon's knot, and then you can run tags above that knot, typically, 14 to 20 inches apart, depending again on flows. And then at the very end of things, you have just your weights. So it's different from an inline rig. It's going to be a bounce rig, so you have tags. So, yeah, just being able to be proficient with that is also very important on this particular river, is
Hmm.
having that bounce rig dialed, if you're fishing nymphs. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yeah, I like the progression too. It's always interesting to hear how people will like to break it down and what's my change up going to be. First I do this, then I try this, then I try this. Kind of scenario, and everyone's different, right? And I think a lot of it comes down to
Mm,
confidence. You know, I remember going out with a good buddy of mine on the Provo when I first started. His name's Chris Passage. He was a local guide here. The guy's he's a rock star, and I remember him putting me in the water, showing me how to load my bobber and cast to flop it up river and get the drift. And I wasn't getting into fish, and it was like he's like, okay, I want you to take 2 steps forward, do the same cast, and that
mm,
was like the difference. He moved me because he kept seeing that I wasn't able to put my cast in the right place, but I made the same cast and
mm.
it went in the right place because I had moved. And for him, that was one of his progressions. All right, I'm not, instead of instructing him again to make a different cast, which he's not capable of doing, or for some reason not clicking, I'm just
Right.
going to move him. And yeah, I might scoot these fish right here, but he's going to get him on the tail out or the swing,
Yeah, no,
etc.
and I
So
think that's
it's
that's
pretty
a
cool.
great piece of advice. Obviously presentation and having your rig dialed is almost a gimme, but sometimes just a couple steps, right, is sometimes all it takes. And
Mm-hmm.
being able to try a whole section of water. So sometimes the end of a run fishes better than the beginning of the run, right? So the headwater might fish better than the
Mm-hmm.
tailwater. And just being aware that some days you could crush it in the headwater and really struggle in the tailwater. You go out the next day, everything seems to be the same, but in reality, something caused them to move up or move down. And just being aware that there's different spots that fish like to hold. And, if you try everything in your willpower and the flies and everything else doesn't seem to be working. Sometimes it is the two steps or you know, hey, let's go try, this from this location in this hole, even though this spot looks better. Maybe we
Hmm.
go try the tailwater because we know that that could also hold a lot of fish. So, yeah, where you are, where you're casting, the mends, your drift. There's so many variables, but I like the two
Yeah.
steps because sometimes it is
Right.
that easy. It's, hey,
Yeah.
you're doing a great job,
Yeah.
but let's get it out another 2 feet. And instead of saying you need to cast
Right.
further,
It's got to be right
yep.
on the seam, or yeah, exactly. And it's funny you said something that reminded me too, because we did that and I started picking up fish, but I was picking them up as I was going through my drift. And at the end of the drift, it was a lot of times when I was doing my lift or in
Mm,
my swing. And so they were feeding on the
yeah.
emergers really. And at the time, I didn't know, the technical side of it. But I remember after a few fish like that, he says, "Let me see your line. Bring your rod tip over here." And I was like, "Why is he changing my flies? I'm finally getting in the fish." And he explained it to me of, how they're all getting down there when your line's coming up. We're gonna fish some bugs that imitate that. And he put some emergers on, and then it was like lights out, like bing, 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 bing. I mean, I was like nailing them, and I was like, "Oh, this is awesome." So yeah, he's a rock star. He's somebody who definitely taught me a lot in a very short period of time. So let's jump into this last section of the show. We got a few minutes left, and that is, you had a couple tools that you take to the river that were advised to you from your mentors. They're very simple, but extremely effective. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, of course. So I think any tool or advice or anything like that that you get with fishing or really almost anything that you do in life is always passed on to you by someone else, right? So it's always funny to think about where the original piece of advice ever even came from. But for both of these things, they were pretty recent acquisitions to my pack. First thing is pretty basic sewing needle. So a friend of mine that's a more senior guide has spent quite a bit of time guiding on the Provo. Always had a sewing needle and some of his fuzz on his pack, kind of where you would store some flies. And I was like, why do you have this? And he's like, oh, I thought you'd never ask. But for him, it was like this, it was so basic and straightforward. I guess he had been carrying it on his pack for years, but I'm like, why would anybody have a sewing needle? Like, it's not like your wader's going to bust open and it's not like you can just suture them up if they're really screwed. He's like, no, this is for your flies. And I was like, oh, okay. So tell me more. And it's for when the epoxy or the glue or anything like that can obstruct the eye hole for you to get your fly onto your line, right? Onto your tippet. So sometimes just the basic part of having a really fine sewing needle, because a lot of the nippers and clippers today will have little tiny kind of a triangular, right, piece on it, but it's never enough.
Right,
And it's always too essentially not fine enough or long enough. So essentially, this one sewing needle
right.
can clear out the eyelet on any fly. And instead of spending 5 minutes trying to get one fly on and then finally saying, screw it, and then trying another one, which you should have done probably 4 minutes ago, you can just grab that little sewing needle, put it through the eye hole, back in action, brand new fly. Um, other thing,
Yeah, I
yeah,
love that tip. I love that tip because you're right, man. I have nippers and scissors, and they all have the little, like you said, the little nub, but they're always kind of tucked in some nook and cranny. It's hard to get your fly in there. And then if in our scenario on the Provo, you're fishing 20s, 22s, like it doesn't
yep,
even touch it, right? You're just like, it's not doing anything for me. And the great thing about a needle is you can stick it anywhere, like on the shoulder of your pack or wherever, and
yeah.
it's tucked in there. So yeah,
Yeah,
great
that's a
tip.
great tip. Another one that's even more recent is actually a simple Sharpie. So if you can have preferably a black and probably a brown Sharpie, you're in a great boat because sometimes, if you have one fly and it just the colors aren't right or you're trying to get it to be a little bit darker, but everything else seems to be the same, with natural, bugs hatching, then sometimes it just needs to be a little bit more brown or really dark, right? Throw a little bit of black on that underbelly, keep everything else the same, and boom, that's the ticket. So yeah, that was a tip from a buddy of mine, Aaron Loomis, just recently. This was probably a month or two ago. Yeah, you don't have Sharpies? I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, at my house, of course. Yeah, I love Sharpies.
Sharpies.
Yeah,
Not taking
exactly. I'm not in
notes.
class. What's going on? And yeah, he's like black, brown, put them in your pack. So those are really solid tidbits of information that, when you asked me about good tips to pass on, those were just like the first two things that came to my mind right off the bat. So hopefully people can,
Yeah.
get some good use out of those. And hopefully I'm not spoiling my buddy's secret on why he crushes it so much when he goes and fishes. So yeah,
I think it's a known tip, but not an often
yeah,
practiced tip. And the one thing I love about the Sharpie scenario is if you're a beginner or an advanced angler, one of the things I recall when I first started fly fishing, especially, was you wanted to go out and buy every kind of fly, and your buddies always told you, oh, you got to have the PMDs this day. You got to have the blue wings. You got to have this. You got to have the whatever, they're all different colors and sizes. My honest recommendation, and I did this for a period of time just to see how it would do. I simplified my fly boxes, and I had nothing but parachute
yep.
Adams, gray parachute Adams, and I had them in various sizes. And I carried a couple Sharpies. I had black, I had brown, and I had olive. Actually, the olive is, instead of olive, I used a bright green, because when you put the bright green on the gray, it actually
olive.
makes it olive instead.
I'm gonna have to
The
add
other
bright
one
green.
was,
That's genius.
thinking about like PMDs and the yellows and stuff like that. But it was like, that's all I did was parachute Adams, because if it's a mayfly, it's a mayfly. It might be a different color or size, but for the most part, it's kind of the same thing, and focused on all the other aspects. But yeah, I think the Sharpie thing is great. I use them a lot on streamers too, to put bar marks and things like that.
Yeah,
Like
and Antonio's a merger. Those are like the
so,
two flies when I think of flies that you can almost use year round if fish are coming up and things are hatching and you for some reason can't figure out what it is. Like those two flies, I don't know why and I don't know how, but I'm with you. Parachute Adams and yeah,
yeah,
Antonio's mergers are two great flies to always have.
yeah. The other one I like on the Provo is a smaller, what they call
Hmm.
bling midge. Just a very, very thin hook that's wrapped in. I use a
Mm,
cream color because I can change the color to
smart.
anything. And then it just has a little bit of tinsel around the head and a black head.
Yep. Yeah, the
Seems to
blue.
work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd have a job if I didn't figure out the blame niche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great fly. Great fly. Well, Zach, hey man, great to have you on the show. You're here in Park City. We're going to get out and go fish. Wait to meet some of those other guys you described. Some of those characters sound like they're pretty fun to fish with. We're going to go have some fun. And thanks for all the tips and advice. It was really cool to hear the humbling side of being an early in career guide. And I wish you the best. And yeah, if you guys want to check out Pale Morning Drift PMD here in Park City, sounds like a great outfit. I'm going to be fishing with these guys. I'll let you in on a little more information once I do that. So again, Zach, have a great day, and we'll see you
Awesome,
guys
Christian.
next
Thank you
week.
so much for the time. I really enjoyed it.